Life is good. Or is it? After the big event, me and my husband took a wonderful tour around France in just my small two-seater car with no itinerary or time constrictions, the wind in our hair, the sun on our faces, and just an open road before us. Married, but with a feeling of pure freedom. The world was our oyster, and we talked incessantly and excitedly about our future and where it would lead us. I was officially a married woman, and I was happy and content with my lot. The future did indeed look bright. After our long break from the real world, we returned fresh and rested, ready to take on the world and face the drag of the daily routine, and that's just what we did. We both stepped back into our fast-paced lives without a second thought or even a hint of dread. Life continued with long working days and much socializing at the weekends as a married couple, enjoying happy times together, relaxed in our friends' company and each other's, or simply on our own with our own separate group of friends. We were married, but this didn't mean we'd suddenly become attached at the hip and were unable to tear ourselves away from each other. I still avoided dinner with the in-laws as much as was possible without being seen as rude, but when we did rarely encounter each other's company, it wasn't so terrible. Mrs. Stuckup had seemed to come to terms with the fact that I was now officially part of the family. Well, not really. I hadn't quite made that final move, and I wasn't sure why every time I was asked if I'd done it yet, I made a feeble excuse and promised to do it the following week, or why I avoided the topic of conversation at all costs. It had been 6 months, and I still hadn't changed my surname. And each month, when my bank statement arrived, with my maiden name printed boldly on the front, it was always a cause for discussion as to why I preferred being called Miss and not Mrs., and as to why I hadn't taken my man's name yet. And each discussion had ended with my promise to go and change the details. But I was just too busy. I went, but the bank was closed. I went and forgot to take the bloody marriage certificate. Oh, love, I've still got 8 years left on my passport. Excuse after excuse, to the point where I would wait by the door for the postie to arrive and quickly sort through the accusing mail. And why I hadn't yet changed my name was a question even I couldn't answer myself. So 6 months had passed by quickly and relatively calmly, with everything good between the newlyweds, apart from the name thing, which I considered to be only a small hiccup in the path of love. After all, I hadn't fallen in love with my man's name, which was certainly not one of the most romantic names known to man, and there were no plans for children in the near future, so what was all the fuss about? One day, I was sitting in my office with my name tag bearing my maiden name, sitting at my desk, looking over my team's month-end stats, when my phone rang through an outside line. Probably a customer calling to complain about some charge or another, I thought as I nonchalantly picked up the receiver. MBNA service, how may I help you? I answered, the same thing I said about 200 times a day. Sometimes I varied it to give myself a change and break from the sound of my own voice repeating the same words over and over again. I can't do it, replied the strained voice on the other end of the line. It was the voice of my husband, and I had no idea what he was referring to. Maybe he was going to give me an ultimatum about the name change thing. My name or the highway, darling. As I changed a percentage on one of my miscalculated stats, I patiently responded, Can't do what, babe? I can't keep doing this job. It's not for me. I need to get out as I'm going crazy. What do you think if I quit? Came the response. Okay, calm down, babe. You're obviously upset, but you're not thinking straight. Maybe it's better you find another job before you quit, no? I responded a little worriedly. There was a long pause before he next spoke. Babe, are you still there? I thought he'd gone off the line. Yeah, well, I thought maybe I could have some time out. You know, have some time to really think about what I want to do as a career. I was thinking, but I could go over to the house in France for a few months or something and do some work on it. It'll be like I'm working, but doing something for us. Now was not the time or the place to be discussing such important, possible life-changing decisions, and certainly not via the telephone. What was he thinking? And where did I fit into this new future plan? Was he really expecting me to make a decision straight away? Okay, so we'd been lucky in the past 7 years, whereby we'd been able to afford to buy a reasonably sized house in a lovely village on the outskirts of Chester. But we'd both worked hard to achieve this in our reasonably well-paid jobs, and we'd bought at a good time when house prices were on the up. And with the extra equity that had built up over time, we'd invested it in another house, in another beautiful village in the heart of rural Brittany. Admittedly, the house was practically a shell and needed much tender loving care and a lot of money to put it back to its full glory. But this was a long-term plan, taking long breaks and slowly turning a shell into a dream home where we could eventually retire to. So, out of the blue, I'd been hit with 2 possible life-changing questions which needed to be discussed calmly and face-to-face. I'm not sure I was ready for any changes yet. Things were good and I didn't want to upset the apple cart. We left the conversation with the promise not to make any rash decisions and the plan to sit down together to discuss the sudden change of events later that evening. And as I turned back to my stats, I was pretty sure my husband had just had one of those days and would be back to his normal self by the time I arrived home. And if not, I was positive I could talk him round with some simple calculations which clearly showed we couldn't afford for him to go off gallivanting to France with me left to pay all the bills and left home alone after just 6 months of marriage. I made a mental note to pick up a nice bottle of red on my way home. A few glasses of this might help to diffuse the situation. Another mental note: pick up 2 bottles, just in case.